My name is William Saunders. I was born in New York, but I was sent to Johns Island when I was 18 months old.
My name is Leila Potts-Campbell, and I was born here in Charleston, South Carolina.
My name is Millicent Brown. I am a history professor at Claflin University, which is in Orangeburg, South Carolina. I am a native of Charleston.
Going to school on Johns Island, one teacher taught 5 grades in one room, but everybody learned. The teachers were really dedicated people.
Growing up here in Charleston was a rather interesting experience as I look back and also remember my experiences, and that is that Montague Street was all white except for us. My father was principal of the Avery School, and along with that came this home that we lived on, 54 Montague Street. Nobody ever spoke to us when we were out. When we came out, they went in.
I was influenced by my father and my mother, who taught me that I lived in a world where things are not fair. And they decided they wanted to be a part of change, and so therefore I became a person who believed that I could be a part of change.
Our language is called Gullah, and to say something in Gullah is that we used to work from kin to can't. You would work from the time you can see in the morning until you can't see at night. And when you got through with that, you were tired. So nobody got into trouble. I don't think we ever thought that we were isolated. Everything we ate was pure food, from the river, from the woods, or from our fields.
My mother had been working with Esau Jenkins on Johns Island. There were no schools on Johns Island for black children. And so she and he and several other people worked together to start Heart Gap.
And the lady Esau Jenkins that's on here, and there's some guys around, used Gullah as a way to really get over on people. He was so good, but he would speak Gullah, and then folk would really think that he was stupid. And when they realized that he had already made a fool of them, because he would have his way.
It wasn't my steps, it was really the steps of my parents and lots of other adults who for a very long time had been trying to get rid of segregated schools. And so for many, many, many years, people had been arguing that this was wrong. You should not segregate people by race.
The American Missionary Associations, which started the school in 1865, it was one of the first schools for blacks in all of the United States. And in the early days, all of the teachers were white because they had to come from up north. In 1949, the head of the school board came to my father and said, well, we're going to close Avery because we just don't want you all here. And so my dad said, well, you can't close Avery. Well, why can't we close it? Well, because Burke doesn't have the 12th grade. There was no other school, black school in Charleston, that had the 12th grade. And if you were going to go to a college, if you were going to become a teacher, you had to go to the 12th grade. The school board closed Avery. They had been trying to close Avery for 5 years.
Miss Moultrie came to me and said that 5 black nurses had got fired, and they fired them because they refused to follow order of a head nurse that wanted them to come when they came into work. They wanted them to just to go on and start working. And the law is that anytime a nurse going on duty, they got to get all the vitals and stuff from the patient, and the charts and what went on, so they can know what they're working with. So they wouldn't do it, and they fired them. So we were able to get those 5 nurses reinstated. But after we did that, we realized that there were so many people at the hospital that didn't have the nerve that those 5 nurses had. So that's when we started to organize the hospital workers. We never wanted a union. We wanted a hospital workers association. And we said that the doctors have an association, the nurses, the lawyers, the mayors, everybody have an association. So why can't the workers have an association? And they forced to strike because they thought that if they forced to strike, they could get rid of the 10 people like Miss Moultrie and them, and then the other folk would come back to work. They made a mistake with that.
Whatever small movie clip on television, it does not describe all of what went on. But what it does show is how much the black community really came to the aid of people.
And there was a group here in Charleston called the Jackson Street Panthers. And I used the Jackson Street Panthers in doing the hospital strike. We made them the protective for the hospital workers. They would go to jail before the hospital workers went to jail. When Reverend Ralph Abernathy and them would go to jail, we would already had them in jail so they could protect them when they go to jail.
We were going to jail every day, right? But we didn't want people to stay in jail because they were going to jail because they were exercising their civil rights. So there was money coming in here, and that was their job. There were other people who were able to get people to put their homes up because they knew that the people that were striking weren't going to run away or any of that. So that's why you don't hear anything much about what happened in jail here during that strike, because they didn't stay in jail. We had wonderful attorneys, Charleston attorneys. And so, everybody had a job. You probably, if you've paid any attention to that, realize that striking went on 2 times a day. Once was when the workers struck. And then in the evening, there were also people walking around the hospital. The strikers were given a rest, and the black community supporters, of whom there were a whole lot, did that. So there was always something going on. Everybody met, and you had your assignment. Today you marched, tomorrow you might have been babysitting, the next day you might have been going out getting food. Everybody had a job. This was a particularly different strike than most of those you read about, mainly because MUSC was a state institution. And so that meant that the police were here from Columbia, and so they felt that they were going to be able to wait out the strikers. And but they didn't.
Charleston lost a lot of money because when it happened was in April to July, the height of the tourist season. All of the hotels and restaurants and everything were closed up. Charleston was closed down for 100 days. We had, National Guards and stuff and curfews.
When the Supreme Court in 1954 ruled that once and for all there should be no separate schools in the United States, my parents started trying to get my sister to be able to leave the all-black school and attend the school that, that had been all-white. And they did not respond. It didn't work well. They just ignored us for years. My sister graduated from high school, and we thought, oh gosh, now what are we going to do? Well, my father and mother switched my name on the suit. And then the case stayed in my name for a while. And so it was over 9 years before Charleston actually paid attention to the Supreme Court decision of 1954. In 1963, I was a part of a group of 11 students who were the first black students to attend all-white schools in Charleston. I attended Rivers High School. I went into the 10th grade, and I was 15 years old at the time. We had had bomb threats at our house even before I went to the school. So I had a father who said, you know, if they're going to blow you up, I don't think they're going to call you and tell you so first. And he made a joke of it. And he's not necessarily right, but at the time, we said, you know, that makes sense. And so we just said, we can't listen to bomb threats and be frightened, you know. We just have to know that what we're doing is the right thing. So that day when when Jackie and I went to Rivers and the bomb threats started, I think I probably didn't take them that seriously. I was more afraid of what some of the students might do. Yeah. I had kind of grown to accept the fact that if people are going to bomb you, they don't usually call you and tell you so first. They really believed that black students were inferior and shouldn't be there. Some of the teachers were some of the nastiest people. They said things to me. When students would say ugly things to me, they wouldn't reprimand them. They would let them call me names. They wouldn't say anything. The students, I remember, were shocked when I could answer questions or when I got A's on a test and they were getting F's and D's, you know, and that's what made them understand that what they had been taught was wrong. And they were just acting out on what they had been taught. Students and faculty had to get over their prejudice. Sometimes we would put on signs and carry picket signs, and we would say, if we can't work here, we're not going to shop here. And sometimes we would sit in at the counters and just sit there even if we wouldn't get served.
We started COBRA right after the hospital strike in 1969. We wanted to come up with an agency to be able to find problems in the community before it began to polarize people. So we would find problem in the community before it became something that would polarize people. And we also found out that if you would send the problem to the head of the company, you can get it solved.
Well, that takes time. Sometimes we would march all day long, and then we would take a break, go to one of the churches, and we'd get something to eat because we hadn't eaten all day. So I remember bologna sandwiches with mustard. That's all I remember. White bread, bologna sandwiches, and mustard. But we would get, and Kool-Aid. And we would eat, and then we would take turns, and then we'd go back. And we would sit in again, or we'd march again. And so having lunch was very important. Yeah.
Every year, and sometimes, of course, then we had the same students, my parents would go on to James Island I don't know who it was they talked to or how all this happened, but girls would come and live with us. And their job was to get an education. Their job was not to babysit us. Their job was to get an education. If those girls wanted to go to college, my dad said, okay, I'll take you to college. Now in Charleston back in that time, let's see, I'm still talking about the late 40s or the early 50s. The community came together and sent children to college if the parents couldn't pay. If you were a good student and you wanted to go to college, you went to college. You didn't ask, were your expenses paid? My parents took several students from Hart Gap, and one of them was Bill Saunders' brother. He was such an excellent student that my mother took him. I mean, his parents agreed, of course, and he graduated from Voorhees.
My parents and people like them in the community had worked so hard to end discrimination. I felt I was there for a purpose. I had a job to do. I was supposed to go in and do something that had not been done before. I was representing my race. I was representing young black children who simply wanted to have an opportunity to have the same facilities, the same books, the same opportunity to excel. I had a job to do. I didn't feel comfortable going home to my parents and complaining because I felt I would have let them down. I think I didn't want them to know how sad I was because I didn't want them to feel guilty. I just decided to hold it in. And I have talked to other people who were the first black students to go into schools, and they tell me the same thing. They didn't want to let the community down. We were there to prove something, and we didn't want people to feel that we couldn't handle it.
If you're disciplined, you can do most anything. Education, I tell my kids, 10 kids, that what they got, PhDs and all that stuff, but I tell them they got training. I am educated. And education, you can educate yourself if you're disciplined enough, because everything is available to you. If you can just read and write, the stuff is available. And that's, but back in the day, that's how most of the folk got educated. They did it with reading and being around folk and stuff and studying stuff, but you gotta be disciplined. You gotta do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. You know, and that's why so many people fail today, because they want somebody else to do it for them. But you can educate yourself.
I know to go back and tell you, well, the whys of how is it that I know, because that's what I have to ask when I'm interviewing. You always want to know why. Well, how come? And then that's when you find out about the person's parents and how they think about things. What have been their experiences? What is their motivation? What made them want to do that in the first place? And that's important. That's very important in understanding why.
The impact of being one of the first to go into the schools is that after the first came the second. After the second came the third. So the impact was somebody had to go first. And that's the only way others will follow you. And so I'm really very happy that when you take steps, even if you're frightened, you know that you're doing something that other people will follow you, and hopefully it's going to be helpful. If somebody doesn't step up and demand that things change, things will never change. Somebody has to be willing to go forward. You can't wait for other people to make things better. I think somebody had to be first, and I just happened to be that person.